welcome. Philadelphia has been probably the most frequent site of the ACLS annual meeting in the 21st century. And of course, in the 18th century, it saw the founding of the American Philosophical Society, which is the site of this evening's Haskins Prize Lecture, and the oldest of ACLS's member societies. And I hope you're aware that you are all also welcome to view the exhibit on Jefferson that's in their museum. So this is a neighborhood, I think, that's used to seeing stately groups of smart-looking people, maybe even learned people, processing determinedly from Dock Street to Chestnut Street on Friday evenings in May. It's used to seeing a group of people that's probably not going to be wearing cargo shorts or slick business suits. And if we were in Canada, they might even call us the Learneds, because that's what the groups of learned societies there are known for when they meet. I had my typical elevator conversation this morning coming down to the meeting with someone who asked me what I was here for, and I said the American Council of Learned Societies, and there was kind of a conversation stopping response, and he said, "Oh, that's impressive." It is true that the two collective nouns in the name American Council of Learned Societies are not always easy to parse. So when I didn't have time to do this, but when explaining ACLS to new acquaintances and making clear first that we're not the ACLU, my colleagues and I have trained ourselves for signs of incipient perplexity on the part of our interlocutors as they try to sort out all the possible memberships implied in our name. And it's often made me imagine a listener running through all the permutations of one of the fictional sponsors of Garrison Keillor's Prairie Home Companion, the National Federation of Associations. Well, what about the Associated Federation of Organizations, or the Federated Organization of Associations, or the Federation of Associated Organizations? Take your pick. These recombinations provoke the thought that ACLS could alternatively be styled as the American Society of Learned Councils. I don't think that suits us quite right, but it would at least alleviate the all too frequent confusion of our acronym for that of the other ACLS, which still pops up first when you Google us, the Advanced Cardiovascular Life Support Program. And I've ruled out ALCS because I think that the baseball world probably isn't ready for us yet. But Mr. Keillor also sometimes invokes another sponsor that resonates perhaps a little bit better with this crowd, the Professional Association of English Majors. As he was one such himself, perhaps we can forgive him for making gentle sport with the vocational uncertainty that is sometimes attached to studying literature. I have to say it seems to have worked out rather well for him, so I don't know why he should poke fun. But he has certainly put his training to good use in his imaginative reconstruction of times and places just far enough beyond recent memory to be tinged with nostalgia, while still readily accessible as cultural touchstones. Keillor's nostalgia, of course, is self-consciously ironic, allowing us, his listeners, to bypass sentimentality and proceed directly to a sense of our own sophistication, and we love him for that. In the humanities, we are self-consciously historical, but we can fall into an unhealthy nostalgia for an imagined academic past, a nostalgia that diminishes our actual present. I've spent a lot of the past year, and indeed the past several years, inveighing against the narrative of decline that's so common today. Those who tell that story are quick to fault the humanities for its own troubles. Students have deserted the humanities, it is argued, to escape the abstruse theory that impoverishes in favor of the emotional and practical engagement that enriches. The data, however, as you well know, suggest a much more complicated picture. In fact, as Ben Schmidt pointed out last year, it depends on when you start counting, and indeed humanities degrees, as a percentage of all degrees awarded, have held steady over recent decades. Michael Berube has made a similar point, emphasizing that the percentage of arts and humanities degrees awarded in 2010 was the same as at their peak in 1970. This morning, I would like to look back as well, with admiration, but without lament. I want to focus on 1964, a date not beyond the memory of a few people in this room. I think you probably know who you are, but certainly a different moment. I will commemorate the report issued that year by the Commission on the Humanities, convened by ACLS, the Council of Graduate Schools, and the United Chapters of Phi Beta Kappa. That report, and the advocacy organized around it, was critical to convincing Congress to create the National Endowment for the Humanities the following year. 1964 was a year of grand projects and great events, the Civil Rights Act of that year being perhaps the most significant. But I don't celebrate this report to premise a narrative of decline, but rather to inventory the arguments then made for public support of the humanities, and to show, I think, that they have been vindicated by the passage of a half century and are very much present in the work of ACLS today. The challenge of making the case for the humanities is, as you know, a regular theme of our gatherings. In 2006, our meeting was a joint convocation with the Association of American Universities on that very subject. At last year's meeting, I anticipated the report of a successor commission, this one appointed by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, our second oldest member society. That report, entitled The Heart of the Matter, continues to be the focus for discussion and a prompt for advocacy. And I don't think it will diminish the force of the latter report if we alloy with it some of the strongest arguments from 50 years ago. 3 of these stand out. First, the declaration that the humanities have a profoundly public purpose. Second, the contention that there is a centering integrity to the humanities beyond their instrumental utility. And third, the unapologetic assertion that the humanities are intellectually vital fields of inquiry. But before elaborating on these points, I would like to sketch the background of the 1964 report by first putting it in the context of the history of ACLS. 50 years ago, ACLS was only a few years beyond a real crisis, the resolution of which truly redefined the organization. In 1957, ACLS was on the verge of bankruptcy. Professor Howard Mumford Jones, then the council's chair, has left us a description of the council's headquarters, then in Washington, D.C., before the subsequent revival. I've quoted this before, but I hope you won't mind if you hear it again. For some of you, it will be the first time, and I think it's worth actually repeating. The ACLS was housed on the second floor of an ancient brick building not far from the Capitol. This might have well been built for the Pecksniff firm when Martin Chuzzlewit was a new book. There were a few modern touches, like a telephone or two, and some typewriters, but when one opened the door to ACLS for the first time, he stepped back 100 years. This looked like the end of the line for the American Council of Learned Societies. There was about enough money in the treasury to pay the staff for the next 3 months, and I could not see any prospect of income beyond that time. Now, as you will hear in the next hour from our treasurer, Nancy Vickers, we're today in a much more salubrious position, thank goodness, and the line of our work is not near an end, but extends far into the horizon. But the foundation of that good health was laid when Professor Jones and Professor Whitney Oates asked Frederick Burkhardt to become president of ACLS, moved the council's offices to New York, following the money, and undertook to build a program that could attract regular support and endowment funds. Beyond ACLS, Burkhardt, Jones, and Oates confronted an additional problem. The humanities had not found a firm footing under the growing canopy of federal funding. This challenge can be compared to one from the early 20th century, when another new regime of national funding for university research, that of the philanthropic foundations, took science as its reigning model. And indeed, the term scientific philanthropy is how early foundation managers distinguished themselves from mere charity. The leaders of the early ACLS worked to create a place for the humanities in that model, and in so doing helped establish the partnership of our council and philanthropic foundations that persists today. But after World War II, it became clear that a new regime was emerging, one in which federal support defined national priorities in research and education. The 1964 Commission chaired by Barnaby Keeney, who was president of Brown University, was the culmination of efforts to get federal recognition for the humanities, just as their predecessors had won foundation recognition. Now, what about the report itself? The 1964 Commission's report at its core is a very succinct 15 pages. Much longer appendices included a statement on the humanities and the schools, on libraries for the humanities, and separate reports from 24 ACLS constituent societies. The Commission defined the humanities not with a list of academic specializations, but with a description of their social functions. The humanities are the study of that which is most human, the Commission pronounced, adding that the humanities may be regarded as a body of knowledge and insight, as modes of expression, as a program for education, as an underlying attitude to life. That attitude toward life centers on concern for the human individual, for his emotional development, for his moral, religious, and aesthetic ideas, and for his goals, including in particular his growth as a rational being and a responsible member of his community. The primacy of science in contemporary culture now obliges advocates for the humanities to make their case conscious of that reigning ideal. I would note that Deborah Fitzgerald, who's Dean of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at MIT, did so compellingly in a recent Boston Globe op-ed on the power of the humanities, where she asserted that, quote, the world's problems are never tidily confined to the laboratory or spreadsheet, end quote. Members of the 1964 Commission warned that the already impending imbalance between in the funding and size of the two enterprises would not only warp the national culture, but disadvantage science itself. Science is far more than a tool for adding to our security and comfort, it says. It embraces in its broadest efforts, in its broadest sense, all efforts to achieve valid and coherent views of reality. As such, it extends the boundaries of experience and adds new dimensions to human character. Through the humanities, we may seek intellectual humility, sensitivity to beauty, and emotional discipline. By them, we may come to know the excitement of ideas, the power of imagination, and the unsuspected energies of the creative spirit. One of the report's formulations of the public purpose of the humanities was repeated in the legislation creating the NEH. Democracy demands wisdom of the average man. A complementary passage of the report was the inspiration for our panel this afternoon. This commission conceives of the humanities not merely as academic disciplines confined to schools and colleges, but as functioning components of society which affect the lives and well-being of all the population. When Fred Burkhardt testified in support of the legislation creating the NEH, he made the same point in his way. If what was at stake, he said, here were nothing more than the pleadings of a group of scholars who wanted more for themselves or who were selfishly concerned for the advancement of their own narrow specialties, I can assure you that I would not be appearing before you today. Or if I did appear, it would be to take the other side. The fact is, however, that the case for support of the humanities is the case for the preservation and improvement of the very bases of our civilization. Advocates for the humanities seek to balance arguments for the instrumental utility of humanistic study with declarations of its intrinsic value. To my mind, this has never been an either-or proposition. It's clearly always both and. The humanities have immediate application in the world precisely because they deal with ultimate concerns. After all, there's nothing as practical as a good theory. The authors and allies of the 1964 report achieved this balance by foregrounding the normative and ethical dimensions of the humanities. Howard Mumford Jones, then president of the MLA, stated to a U.S. Senate committee that nothing is more necessary to a nation than the general acceptance of principles of intellectual and moral integrity. Another member of the commission, Thomas J. Watson Jr., who was chairman of IBM, put what he called a fighting case for the humanities in this way. Most important of all, to resolve the fundamental issues we face today, it is not enough to know the right. What we need over and above knowledge of the right is an inspired will to do the right as individuals and as a society. Such inspiration, even in an age of the most advanced thinking machines we can imagine, will continue to be the province of the humanities, of literature, philosophy, and the arts. In a recent essay on the history of the endowment's funding, Malcolm Richardson notes that the Commission's report provided the administration with a formulation through which to promote separate agencies for the humanities on the one hand and the arts on the other. Indeed, he states that the rationale for a separate humanities agency was a key factor in overcoming longstanding political resistance to arts funding. Without the NEH, neither of the endowments would have come into being. White House endorsement came in September 1964, when President Johnson, speaking at Brown University, declared, "There simply must be no neglect of the humanities. The values of our free and compassionate society are as vital to our national success as the skills of our technical and scientific age. And I look with the greatest of favor upon the proposal by your own able President Keeney's Commission for a National Foundation for the Humanities." Our predecessors a half century ago were becomingly unapologetic in proclaiming the intellectual vitality of the scholarship in the humanities. And I'll conclude this review of the 1964 Commission's report by again quoting Fred Burkhart's testimony to Congress. He asserted that the undeniable needs of the humanities, particularly in the areas of basic research and advanced scholarship, are a function of the strength rather than the weakness of humanistic scholarship in the United States in our time. Quoting statements from learned societies appended to the report, he noted that, with no exception, they speak of the vitality and richness of American scholarship and look forward to even greater achievements in the future. Fred continued, "Precisely because revolutionary new tools for the analysis and study of languages have been developed, precisely because American scholars are leading the world in the study of such areas as Asia, Africa, and Latin America, precisely because splendid new techniques are being introduced into such fields as musicology, literature, and the history of art, it is more important than ever that basic research be supported on a large scale, that scholarly communication be improved, that the publication of the results of scholarship be facilitated, and that the necessary materials and tools be made available to all serious scholars." Burkhart's short list frames not only the strengths of the humanities in 1964, but their achievements over the past 50 years and the work of ACLS today. It would be easy to measure our strength simply in numbers. For instance, ACLS's annual competitions for fellowships and grants distribute now more than 300 awards that carry a total of over $15 million in support, which is about 4.5 times in inflation-adjusted dollars the amount awarded 50 years ago. Each year, we mobilize the efforts of approximately 600 scholars to evaluate the nearly 4,000 applications we receive, applications that are supported by 11,000 reference letters, and I'm sure you know something about that. As a reviewer for 2 of our competitions, I can also attest firsthand to the qualitative strength of the field, the impressive array of research questions in the proposals, their clarity of expression, and the evident dedication to contributing to the flow of knowledge are all signs that point to the vitality of humanistic research today. The hundreds of intellectually innovative projects that ACLS supports each year help us better understand the world and ourselves. Some bring much needed historical and cultural perspective to matters of great contemporary relevance, as do the several fine projects winning awards this year that examine the complex trajectory of Russian political culture in the 20th century, or that contextualize the development of climate science in the United States and Europe. Others focus our attention to hearing and recovering voices that were long marginalized, like the proposed digital archives for Black Caribbean writings of the 19th and 20th century, and for 20th and 21st century transgender history, or the new material of history of stucco, that charts this unassuming medium's surprising cultural valences in early modern Italy and beyond. There are many examples more, and I encourage you to review on our website, on our recent fellows page, many of the others. I know you'll be struck, as I am, by the vibrancy and importance of the research represented there. Fred Burkhart also pointed to the preeminence of the United States in the study of other cultures. The intellectually powerful engine of area, international, and foreign language studies built up over the 20th century is not only a national resource, but a global one. Scholars from all around the world come to American colleges, universities, and libraries to gain access to the knowledge and methods that can help interpret the history and cultural heritage of their own societies. And I'm sure many of you know this, but at the Library of Congress, more documents come in every year, 55%, I think precisely, from other countries than come from the United States. This is one of the clearest instances where scholarly strength requires continued support. Yet, as we know, the federal buttresses for this magnificent structure of learning, Title VI, Title VIII, the Fulbright programs, are crumbling. It will be one of our great challenges going forward to sustain the strength that has been so evident up till now. ACLS has long advocated for scholarship without borders. Our engagement with the field of China studies is almost as old as we are, nearly 90 years old, and our programs in that field continue to expand in productive directions, in particular through our multi-pronged fellowship program funded by the Henry Luce Foundation. The African Humanities Program, which ACLS administers in Nigeria, Uganda, Ghana, Tanzania, and South Africa, with the generous support of the Carnegie Corporation, has entered its second 5-year cycle with an exciting new partnership between the ACLS and the University of South Africa. Last year at the annual meeting, I was pleased to announce the launch of the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation program in Buddhist Studies. The Ho Foundation has enabled us to create a program that is truly international in scope. Scholars from around the world may apply to conduct their research anywhere in the world, and this flexibility has encouraged applications from all nationalities, many nationalities, in this first year's competition. I look forward to sharing the results of this first competition later this month, but I can say now that the program has more than lived up to its promise of facilitating global research around a subject of transnational and broad historical importance. The emergence over the past 50 years of new objects of study and new angles of vision, most notably an attention to peoples and social processes, to things and places heretofore ignored, has helped prepare the humanities for the intellectual challenges of the 21st century. Moreover, incisive critical inquiry into the often arbitrary and contingent nature of what might previously have been taken for granted has enlarged the universe of what ought to be taken seriously. How has this research contributed to the greater good? The historian David Hollinger provides one answer. Much humanities scholarship in the latter half of the 20th century, he writes, brought new and sustained attention to questions of inclusion and exclusion. Not only the incorporation of what today are called underrepresented demographic groups, but also consideration of the specific fields and subfields that would be included at the expense of others, the directions taken in expanding the study of foreign cultures in relation to the study of the United States itself, and the role of the academic humanities in American public discourse. This work, Hollinger explains, was propelled by the same impulses that power scientific inquiry. As he puts it, there is insufficient appreciation of the social value of risk-taking that is a necessary part of the successful operation of the human sciences. The academic humanities and social sciences in the United States have long constituted a major apparatus for bringing evidence and reasoning to domains where the rules of evidence are strongly contested and the power of reason often doubted, not necessarily denied. Such risk-taking driven by reason and curiosity is something we as humanists instill in our students as the important capacity for critical thinking. And it's one of the many arguments for the centrality of the humanities in a functioning democracy. Besides the skills that the humanities instill in the undergraduate classroom, we must also show that the advanced study of the humanities, even at the doctoral level, prepares one for a number of possible career paths, be they inside or outside the academy. As it enters its 4th year, the ACLS Public Fellows Program continues to demonstrate the broad applicability of advanced humanities training to enabling our fellows to engage critically and creatively with the major social problems we face. Nick Galasso, a public fellow placed with Oxfam America, co-authored a recent report on global wealth inequality that influenced discourse at this year's Davos Forum and that continues to garner the attention of mass media outlets like USA Today and Al Jazeera America. In the tense months leading up to the 2014 Winter Olympics in Russia, Andrea Mazzarino, an ACLS public fellow working with Human Rights Watch, traveled to Moscow to release the findings of a major report on the severe challenges facing people living with disabilities in that country. Those are but two examples of the exploits of the more than 40 talented PhDs who have been selected as public fellows since inception. In 2014 to 15, our fellows will take on demanding roles in formulating anti-poverty policy for the federal government, in forging new partnerships among schools, hospitals, and community health organizations, and in coordinating relief for refugees in the Democratic Republic of Congo, among many other opportunities. The diversity of organizations that partner with us for the Public Fellows Program is itself a signal to the academic community and to employers everywhere that, and I quote Deborah Fitzgerald again, there is a great need for the in-depth understanding of human complexities, the political, cultural, and economic realities that shape our existence, as well as fluency in the powerful forms of thinking and creativity cultivated by the humanities, arts, and social sciences. And we're, of course, very grateful to the Mellon Foundation for enabling us to mount this program. Learned societies play a vital role in facilitating the publication and dissemination of the best of their members' research. But societies also wisely recognize their responsibility to represent their disciplines to a public that every day encounters the substance of the humanities without necessarily recognizing it. Last month, I was able to meet with the board of the Society for Military History, which this year will participate in Standing Together, the NEH's agency-wide initiative designed to explore various facets of military service and wartime combat in American culture. As part of the Standing Together program, the SMH will work closely with faculty at Northeastern University to develop and promote a workshop that will train historians in digital mapping techniques and network analysis, two research methods that offer particular purchase on the study of history told in terms of battlefields, marches, and mobilizations, and shifting lines of soldiers. The combination in this program of public outreach and digital training for professional scholars shows just how pivotal societies can be in convening scholars to bring their research into productive dialogue with topics of widespread social relevance. The progress of the past 50 years has vindicated Fred Burkhardt's argument that it is the strengths and not the weaknesses of the humanities that recommend their support. But what of the next half century? For the last 5 years, ACLS has convened an annual gathering of the heads of national fellowship granting organizations in the humanities, the Guggenheim Foundation, the NEH, the National Humanities Center, the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and several others, to assess the state of that enterprise. All of us agree that there is a paradox to the fellowship business. One mark of the need for a fellowship program is the number of applications it attracts. It's the number we always log. Since the recession, most agencies have experienced an increase in the demand for their fellowships, and ACLS is no exception. In many of our competitions, there are 20 applicants for every available fellowship. But that very indication of the success of our program, which identifies great demand, is also, obviously, a measure of unmet need. The aggregate results from all funders spotlight a national deficit in the support of the production of knowledge. With these concerns in mind, I'm delighted to announce some good news. At its meeting yesterday, our board approved our drawing more from our endowment devoted to fellowships, but staying within our target range, in order to increase the number of fellowships we award in our central endowment-funded program. It will go from 65 to 70 next year, with the 5 additional awards designed for associate professors, which appears to be the band that has been most disadvantaged by the ratios. And we will also be raising our largest stipends for full professors to $70,000 from $65,000 per academic year. And my hope is that before too long, given success in both our development campaign and the capital markets, we'll be able to announce additional increases in our fellowship program with the approximate goal of awarding 75 endowment-funded fellowships every year with top stipends of $75,000. So that will be easy to remember. Our collective challenge today is different from the one confronted by Fred Burkhart, Howard Mumford Jones, and Whitney Oates, or in fact by their predecessors, Charles Homer Haskins and Waldo Leland, who led the ACLS in the 1920s. There is no longer one key reigning power in higher education that needs to be convinced of the value of the humanities. Foundations in the federal government both remain important, but we all know that market forces are structuring or transforming the shape of our educational system. Where in the 1960s there was convergence among institutions in mission and ambition, 50 years on, there is greater stratification among and within colleges and universities. Most concerning is the growing body of research suggesting that our system of higher education is no longer a solvent for social inequality, but its glue. Many predict that technological and economic change will disrupt higher education on the scale of what has happened to newspapers or record companies. Will these changes dislodge the humanities from its still new but very limited place in national educational priorities? Your college could go the way of the video store. To avoid that fate, colleges and universities are told to attend to their customers. But who ultimately are the customers? Are they students, tuition payers, or society at large? To address this question is to participate in the intensifying national debate about the nature of higher education in the 21st century. What is it to be? For whose good? The stakes are high. One despairs of looking to federal government, and certainly not to the Supreme Court, to reverse the undeniable trend toward increasing inequality. Some private foundations, Mellon and Ford prominent among them, have been working to build pathways for more diverse academic generations. And we at ACLS should think about what role we might be able to play. If we still agree that the humanities are both an educational program and an approach to life that, quote, centers on concern for the human individual, unquote, then the value conferred by that educational program must be widely shared. If, as we are certain, the humanities have value, then they have value for all students, not just the traditionally privileged classes. It takes only a quick dip into the contemporary infoscape of cable news and online media buzz to know that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 did not finally settle issues of race and diversity once and for all, and that the question of who we are as a nation is still an open one to many. In conclusion, let me go back to 1964 and the ACLS annual meeting, which was chaired by Robert Lumiansky. Lumiansky reported to the council that the board had been discussing the long-range financial future of ACLS and the desirability of obtaining endowment funds which would be large enough to ensure the permanency of the council's basic program. The delegate from the American Philological Association asked what effect the prospect of a national foundation for the humanities would have on those plans. The meeting's minutes record that Mr. Lumiansky said he thinks there will be a real place for the continuing activities of the ACLS, even if we are successful in achieving federal support through a national foundation for the humanities and the arts. The two things, he thinks, go along together rather than in any kind of opposition. 50 years later, Lumiansky's judgment has been confirmed. Both NEH and ACLS are still here and firm partners. And we also have some assurance that the ACLS will indeed have a long-range financial future. I trust that you join me in hope that when our successors a half-century hence look back on the record of our age, they will conclude that we helped advance the manifest intellectual vitality of the humanities, that we worked to give them the widest possible scope within all sectors of higher education, as well as beyond the classroom, and that we did so without diluting their normative power and integrity. Thank you.